Welcome to Virtual History Tours, your guide to people, places, and events that have shaped the world we live in. You've accessed Understanding the Constitution, Creating the Federal Government. Your tour will begin in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome. I'm Allison, your tour guide. I'm going to take you on one of our most popular tours, Creating the Federal Government. On our tour, we're going to travel to different times and places and hear from James Madison of Virginia and Alexander Hamilton of New York, two people who played major roles in the writing and the creation of the Constitution. Do you know what a Constitution is? Well, it's a framework or an outline of a government. And the United States Constitution is the oldest written framework of a government in existence today. So let's get this tour started. Hang on, here we go. Our first stop, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the year 1776. This is Independence Hall. It's called that because it was here on July 4th, 1776, that representatives from the 13 colonies declared independence from Great Britain and King George III. With the signing of the Declaration of Independence, America became a free and independent country. Without British rule, there was no government in place, so the leaders of the Continental Congress had to create one. In fact, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia had proposed the creation of the new government at the same time that he called for the Declaration of Independence.
I propose that a plan of confederation be prepared and transmitted to the respective colonies for their consideration.
A committee was formed to write the document. The committee didn't want to create a government that was too powerful, and they certainly didn't want a powerful leader like King George III. That's what they were fighting to get away from. The government the committee came up with was called the Articles of Confederation. A confederation is a very loose association of strong, independent parts. Under the Articles of Confederation, the states had most of the power. The central government had very little power. The new government went into effect in 1781, but almost from the beginning, it was clear that the Articles of Confederation weren't going to work. James Madison of Virginia was one of the most outspoken critics of the Articles of Confederation.
This government cannot succeed because the Articles of Confederation lack the great principles of a political system. It's merely a treaty of friendship between the various states.
And this is what Alexander Hamilton of New York thought of the Confederation.
The fundamental deficiency with this government is that Congress has no power. Now, Congress must have powers to deal with national problems. And there is no central court system. So when various states have a dispute, there is no place for them to go to work out their differences. Now, the third deficiency, and this is a great one, is that there is no central leader, no chief executive that the people can point to as the head of government.
No Congress with any real power, no head of government, no court system. Hold on, time to move again. This is New York City. Beginning in 1785, New York was the capital of the United States. James Madison came here as a delegate to Congress in 1787. By that time, more people were beginning to see that the Articles had to be fixed.
From the time I got to New York, the only thing of importance that happened in Congress was a recommendation for a proposed meeting in May to revise the Articles. It was becoming apparent that the Articles didn't address the question of leadership. We had a newly formed nation that needed a government. And it was important for us to put together a document that outlined the way the new nation should be run.
So, Congress passed a resolution calling for each state to send delegates to a meeting to revise the Articles of Confederation. And that's where we're off to next. Where was the meeting held? Right back here at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Every state but Rhode Island was represented. Of all the delegates who attended the convention, James Madison was surely the most important. In fact, Madison's contribution was so outstanding, he's become known as the father of the Constitution. But Madison contributed more than his ideas for the new government. He played another very important role.
There was a secretary of the convention, William Jackson, whose job it was to take notes and keep a record of what went on. But he wasn't very good at it, and he wasn't present for all the sessions. Except for the casual fraction of an hour in a day, I was present for every session. I chose a seat in front of the presiding officer with the other delegates on my left and right, so I could hear what was said clearly. I took down everything, sometimes using abbreviations that only I could understand. Every night, I went back to my lodgings and wrote out my daily notes. It was a very arduous task. I thought it would kill me. But I thought it was important to have an exact record in my own hand of what was said from the chair or spoken by the members.
The delegates also had to set rules for the convention. One rule made Madison's notes even more important.
It was decided that we would conduct all our sessions in secret. We wanted a free exchange of ideas and debate without any impediments. Secrecy seemed best. All the delegates agreed not to talk about or divulge what went on inside the hall. In fact, we went so far as to nail the windows shut so no one outside could listen in. As the summer went on and the weather got hotter and hotter, that became a very great problem for many of those in attendance.
It's a good thing Madison decided to take notes, because his record is the only exact step-by-step account we have of how our national government was created. On the fourth day, a plan was presented to the convention. Governor Edmund Randolph of Virginia made the presentation, but it was really the work of James Madison. It was called the Virginia Plan.
The Virginia Plan called for the government to be divided into 3 departments or branches: the legislative branch, which would enact the laws; the executive branch, which would see that the laws were carried out; and the judicial branch, which would see that justice was done under the law. The separation of powers was very important. We had to guard against the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, in the hands of one person, or a few people, or even a group. It doesn't matter if the powerful are elected, self-appointed, or born to their office. If the powers aren't separated, the result is tyranny.
Once Madison's plan was put on the table, Alexander Hamilton addressed the real issue.
I questioned the very idea of a confederation, that loose association of very independent states. I saw in Madison's plan a strong central government, a true national government.
Others agreed with Madison and Hamilton. After some debate, a resolution on the Virginia Plan was passed.
A national government ought to be established consisting of a supreme legislative, executive, and judiciary.
The delegates had taken a bold step. Now, instead of just revising the Articles of Confederation, they were creating a constitution for a new kind of government. The convention went on to debate specific issues.
Perhaps the most important issue was how we would assure that the small states would not be dominated by the large states. Then there was the question of how power would be divided between the new strong central government and the governments of the several states. And of course, there was the decision to be made on what type of executive we would have. Should the executive be a single person or a committee? Many different opinions were presented, and presented forcefully, I must say. The debates got quite heated. But in every instance, we were able to find solutions through compromise. And that is something that anyone studying the Constitution should know and remember.
The Constitution that the delegates signed in Philadelphia in 1787 was based on three essential principles, and those principles still apply today after more than 200 years. First is the separation of powers. That means that power is divided between three branches of government: the legislative branch that enacts the laws, the executive branch that sees that the laws are carried out, and the judicial branch that interprets the laws. Next is a system of checks and balances. This means that each branch of the government has some authority over the other branches. It limits the powers of each branch and assures that each one has to work with the other. That way, no one branch can become too powerful. For example, Congress passes the laws, but the president has the power to veto or reject the law. However, if 2/3 of the legislators still want the law, even after it's been vetoed, they can vote to override the president. And the Supreme Court can invalidate or cancel a law if it finds that the law contradicts or violates the principles of the Constitution. That's just one example of checks and balances. Like the separation of powers, the system of checks and balances assures that power within the government is kept in balance. A third principle of the Constitution is called shared powers. That means that the federal or central government shares powers with the states. So the federal government has some powers, and the states have some powers, and they share some powers. For example, only the federal government can declare war and print money, but the states can establish their own schools and regulate local governments. But both the federal and state governments can impose taxes, regulate banks, and have their own courts. This makes our national government a federation. Remember, we said before that a confederation is a weak central government with very strong independent states. Well, a federation is a strong central government that shares power with the states who keep control over their own affairs. That's an overview of the Constitution. Now let's look at the Constitution step by step. The Constitution opens with the preamble, or introduction. We, the people of the United States. This tells the world that this government has been established and created by the people. Article 1 outlines the legislative or lawmaking branch of the government, Congress. Article 2 lays out the framework of the executive branch, the president, the vice president, and the departments of the federal government. Article 3 outlines the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, and the other federal courts. Article 4 talks about the relationship between the states and the federal government and between the states themselves. Article 5 explains how the Constitution can be changed or amended. Article 6 makes it clear that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. That means that while the states retain the power to make certain laws, they cannot make laws that go against the Constitution and national laws. Article 7 says that the Constitution will go into effect when it is ratified by 9 states. That happened on June 21st, 1788, when New Hampshire voted its approval. That's it. The entire document that was written and signed in Philadelphia in 1787. The ability to amend the Constitution is one of its greatest strengths. It allows the Constitution to grow and adapt to different times and changing ideas. The amendment process is an example of shared powers that we talked about before. Amendments can be proposed by either Congress or the states, but for a proposed amendment to become part of the Constitution, it has to be approved by 3/4 of the states. The first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. These amendments spell out the liberties and rights all Americans have. They were added almost immediately because many delegates to the convention in Philadelphia were very upset that they had not been included in the first place. It was only the promise that the first Congress would pass a Bill of Rights that allowed many people to accept the Constitution. So now let's take a look at the first 10 amendments and see what these important rights are. The First Amendment guarantees our personal liberties, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, a free press, the right to assemble, and the right to petition the government when we want. The next 7 amendments deal with other legal rights, the rights of states to have militias and arm their citizens, the rights of people accused of crimes, the right to be secure in your home, the right to a fair trial. The 9th Amendment says that there are more rights than those listed in the first 8 amendments, and that not listing them doesn't mean they don't exist. The right to privacy is one of those rights. The 10th Amendment says that any power not given to the federal government belongs to the states and to the people. Well, that's the Bill of Rights. As promised, it was drawn up by the very first Congress. Remember we said that the ability to amend the Constitution was one of its most remarkable features? Well, the 11th and 12th Amendments are perfect examples of that because they both corrected flaws in the original Constitution. The 11th Amendment made a correction to the court system, and the 12th changed the way the president is elected. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were adopted after the Civil War. They abolish slavery, extend the rights guaranteed in the Constitution to all Americans no matter what state they live in, and prohibit the right to vote from being denied because of race or color. The 16th Amendment gives the federal government the right to collect income taxes. When James Madison was working on the Constitution, he said,
"In framing a system which we wish to last for ages, we should not lose sight of the changes which the ages will produce."
In other words, the Constitution should be able to adapt to different times and different ways of thinking. And the 17th Amendment is a perfect example of what he meant. You see, originally, senators were selected by their state governments, not elected by the people. But that became an outdated idea. Now senators are elected directly by the people. The 18th Amendment was called Prohibition. It prohibited the sale, manufacture, and transport of liquor. After 12 years, the 18th Amendment was repealed by the 21st Amendment. The 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote in all state and federal elections. Before 1919, when the amendment went into effect, each state could decide for itself whether or not to allow women to vote. The 19th Amendment made it the law of the land. The 20th Amendment is another one that came about because of changing times. When the Constitution was written, travel was slow and difficult, so there was a long waiting period between the time the president was elected and the time he actually took office. The 20th Amendment shortened that waiting period. The 22nd Amendment also deals with the presidency. It limits the number of times a person can be elected president to 2 terms. Did you know that people living in Washington, D.C. couldn't vote in presidential elections until 1961? That's when the 23rd Amendment, which grants that right, went into effect. The 24th Amendment also deals with voting rights. It closes a loophole in the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment said that no one could be denied the right to vote because of race. Well, many states got around that by charging people a tax to vote. It was really a way to deny the vote to African Americans because many of them were too poor to pay the tax. The 24th Amendment made the poll tax illegal. The 25th Amendment is another one that deals with presidential succession. The 26th Amendment sets the age for voting at 18. Before that, every state could set whatever age it wanted. In most states, the voting age was 21. Amendment 27 went into effect in 1992. It deals with pay raises for members of Congress. There you have it, the Constitution of the United States of America, the oldest living framework for a government on earth, one that has served our nation well for more than 200 years. That concludes our virtual tour of the creation of the federal government. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.